Be blunt, it came as a shock. I was not aware that this is something that she was contemplating doing. But in the end, she made her decision. And we have to move on as a show. I don't like it, I'm not happy about it, because I appreciate her and what she has meant to me, what she has meant to the show, what she has meant to the network, what she's meant to the business. And I'm gonna miss her.
When Molly Qerim abruptly departed ESPN, fans were completely taken aback. She is now speaking up, though. In a surprising turn of events, she is directly accusing Stephen A. Smith of being the cause of everything. Stephen A. has established his reputation by criticizing all members of the industry. But will the attention ultimately turn back on him at this point? Let us go back. Since 2006, Molly Qerim has been a regular face at ESPN, beginning her career in digital platforms behind the scenes before transitioning to on-air positions. She took over as First Take's permanent host in 2015, opposite Stephen A. Smith, and she was instrumental in becoming the morning discussion show ESPN's crown jewel. First Take was more than merely well-liked by 2023. On the network, it was the most watched show. This is where the mess begins, though, and many people failed to notice this particular aspect. A casual Instagram story was used to announce Molly's departure rather than a press conference or a lavish ESPN send-off. She praised her co-workers, acknowledged the privilege of hosting First Take, and expressed her gratitude to the people who helped her along the way. She even used the simple phrase, "keep tuned," to hint that fresh chances were coming.
Be blunt, it came as a shock. I was not aware that this is something that she was contemplating doing. But in the end, she made her decision. And we have to move on as a show. I don't like it, I'm not happy about it, because I appreciate her and what she has meant to me, what she has meant to the show, what she has meant to the network, what she's meant to the business. And I'm gonna miss her.
But take note of what was absent. No shade was thrown, and she did not really explain why she was leaving. But then something unexpected happened. Molly arrived for her First Take on Monday, September 15th, performed the show as she had for almost 10 years, and then left the studio in silence. There was no tribute, no farewell piece, and no indication that this would be her final time occupying the chair. Then, suddenly, the bombshell was dropped less than 24 hours later. She resigned immediately and formally. The worst part is still to come. It was not even anticipated that this would occur until months later. According to the Sports Business Journal, her departure was initially scheduled for the year's conclusion. What caused her timeline to suddenly accelerate overnight? According to insiders, something happened behind those doors that went beyond a simple career shift. It was a calculated move that totally caught ESPN executives off guard. This resignation was not your typical one. It was a move of power. Additionally, the aftermath was covered with breadcrumbs due to the explosion.
Now, the last part of it is, this is the twist. She wanted to do other stuff. No, basically. You wanted to host your own show. No, basically. You want more money? Not much. Now, who signs off on all the money there? Think about it. Think about it. The bosses. But who are the bosses? That's Stephen A. Smith as well.
The network even offered Molly a new contract, according to ESPN, which revealed that contract negotiations had been ongoing for months. However, she took the startling choice to leave and seek other possibilities rather than resigning. The story gets interesting at this point. The manner in which Stephen A. Smith learned of her departure demonstrates how abrupt this action was. It was all in Stephen's live reactions. You could hear it in his tone that the man appeared caught off guard, nearly taken by surprise in front of millions of people. Someone who had months to prepare would not have reacted that way. That was real-time damage control in action. Now, be mindful of this moment. Burke Magnus, president of programming at ESPN, swiftly jumped in with a well-written statement complimenting Molly's professionalism, poise, and contribution to First Take's growth since 2006. He made it clear that the network genuinely hoped she would stay, even hinting at potential jobs outside the program.
Perkins had his deal. And when Perkins was up, remember? Perkins was getting a day job rate, and he turned that into $700,000 a year job. Perkins just talked about that recently, about how Stephen A. Smith has that pull. Stephen A. Smith even talked about that when he checked Cam Newton recently, talking about, hey, I've hooked a lot of guys up with money around here.
The corporate spin, however, followed. The negotiations were not in sync. The novel was meant to end with that tidy little phrase, but it left a dozen more questions unanswered. Shea Cornette, Christine Williamson and Monica McNutt were among the in-house names that Magnus floated during a 30 to 45-day testing period for potential replacements in an attempt to portray it as just another business decision. Let us be honest, though. What caused this transaction to collapse so quickly if it was so simple? Why the rush to prevent damage? Above all, why did Stephen A., of all persons, become so visibly upset and distraught upon hearing the news? In actuality, there were other contracts that failed. This was the result of long brewing power struggles, ego clashes, and shaky relationships. There was more to what viewers saw on TV than a presenter departing. Tensions that had been brewing behind closed doors for years reached a breaking point. The most telling section comes next. Molly congratulated her co-workers and followers in her Instagram farewell post, even referring to her stint at ESPN as a dream come true. However, she omitted Stephen A. Smith, whose name was as conspicuous as a red siren flashing. ESPN could never make a remark that would have the same impact as that silence. Molly never once mentioned Stephen A. Smith by name. That might not seem like a huge concern at first. However, it is difficult to leave someone out in TV land, especially after sitting next to them for almost 10 years. He made a special effort to recognize his alliances when Shannon Sharpe left without a fight. Professional etiquette was still exchanged after Max Kellerman was pushed out of the first take. However, Molly, she made sure her message was kind, neat, and devoid of any acknowledgement of the man she had worked with for 10 years. That quiet says a lot. Recall that Molly and Stephen A. positioned themselves as a formidable team on camera, the ideal mix of moderator and ferocious debater, and that they were the faces that propelled First Take to unprecedented success. Although their chemistry appeared to be effortless, was there something sinister going on beneath the well-groomed smiles? Remember, Molly's career has encompassed much more than ESPN. In addition to working for the NFL Network and CBS Sports, she has been candid about her personal battles, such as her battle with endometriosis. This was not just another host quitting their position. 10 years of dominance at ESPN's premier morning show came to an end with this. ESPN, however, presented it as a voluntary, drama-free choice. But really, how voluntary could it be when she arrived at work one day, performed her duties as usual, and then left the next day? It feels like a fresh start rather than a farewell celebration. Burke Magnus attempted to defuse the situation by informing The Athletic that the leak was the only reason for the sudden change, and that they were getting ready to hold a 30 to 45-day audition process for new hosts. But then, why were they still negotiating to retain Molly if ESPN already had a replacement plan in place? If there was not so much more going on behind the scenes, why play both sides? This is where it all comes down to. There was more to what transpired with Molly Qerim than a contract or a change in career. It had to do with power, influence, and who actually makes decisions at ESPN. Stephen A.'s contribution to all of this goes beyond being a helpful co-host. His response when the news first broke exposed far more than he likely intended. Additionally, it might reveal the long, simmering political power struggle. This is why Stephen A.'s reaction is so intriguing. He did sound dejected. Indeed, he listened intently despite his surprised expression. He spoke with far too much caution. It was as though a filter was applied to each word before it was spoken. When you consider the subsequent response he received, such meticulous evasion of the details becomes even more striking. Stephen was directly criticized by hosts Emmanuel Acho, Kieran Hickey Simple, and LaShawn McCoy on the Speakeasy podcast by using terms like abruptly quit and hinting at unspoken specifics without providing an explanation. They charged him of stoking rumors. Acho specifically said that Stephen A. was lying on both sides and stating that he wished to preserve people's privacy. The cacophony was not subdued by such inconsistencies. It sounded even louder. Furthermore, the critique goes much beyond simply using poor wording. Many questioned whether this was merely on-air chemistry, or had she had enough of being undercut. Then June 2025 arrived, revealing their dynamic in a completely different light. Mid-show, Stephen A.'s laptop was inadvertently captured on camera, and Molly discreetly instructed him to close it to prevent private messages from being seen. He initially refused, dismissing her, but when she applied more pressure, he eventually gave in. She was protecting him from embarrassment, not attempting to cause it. However, the audience knew all they needed to know from the way he paused, as if he did not want to follow her advice. That clip was circulated online as Stephen A., ignoring Molly, and the impression persisted. He should have respected her opinion, but he didn't. The picture becomes clearer when you combine all of these situations. Molly received inadequate support, in addition to inadequate pay. Behind the scenes, the union that appeared so strong on television was rife with little conflicts. Stephen A. has no intention of rebalancing the growing power disparity and rising conflict. Some of these incidents may initially appear to be typical workplace drama. However, the story takes a completely different turn when you connect them across a 10-year period and include the power imbalances and ugly contract disputes. A distinct pattern emerges, showing that Molly and Stephen A.'s collaboration was not as solid as it appeared on screen. Molly's farewell message, which omitted Stephen A.'s name completely, was not an accident, according to Wiley. Her decision to depart right away rather than months later was her way of emphasizing the S and portraying everything as business issues rather than personal strife, which he interpreted as a purposeful gesture of anger. He made it clear that their relationship was not quite as solid as the public was led to believe. The most devastating viewpoint is about to be revealed. The notion that Stephen A. Smith just decided not to stand up for Molly when it mattered, despite having all the resources and authority at his disposal. If such is the case, it calls into question professional respect, loyalty, and the genuine level of ruthlessness in the sports media industry. Because this was more than just a co-host leaving. In a billion-dollar industry, this was about loyalty, power, and influence, or the lack of it. Molly left for reasons other than her work. It served as a reminder of how brittle alliances can become when power and wealth dictate the rules. The fallout followed. ESPN attempted to portray it as an uncontroversial business decision. Their behavior, however, conveyed a completely different message. Urgency was evident in the manner they hurried to manage damage control and the quickness of their reaction. This is the portion that caused a lot of people to take notice. When an employee leaves ESPN, the organization often makes a brief, generic statement and disregards the situation. However, with Molly, ESPN seldom does this, but Burke Magnus, the president of content himself, offered the athlete thorough justifications for her departure. That alone demonstrates their concern for the optics and how seriously they took the criticism. A case study of power, loyalty, and survival at the pinnacle of sports journalism. This entire story is more than simply a headline, and believe me, the consequences of Molly's departure are only getting started. For more breakdowns, be sure to subscribe, leave a comment, and click the like button. And in the next one, I will see you.